On the first warm day, I found myself alone, all by myself, so I grabbed a couple of cold brewskis and took off for the woods near my home. The local woods had a number of dirt paths, unofficial trails, and I followed one to a bluff overlooking the winding river below, where I doffed my shirt to catch a few rays and snapped a cap off one of the cold ones. I was at peace with the world and meditating in the pallid April sunlight. In other words, I was thinking about nothing, when my reverie was disturbed by a movement down the trail. I looked to my left, and running towards me was a young woman. She was tall and tanned, with short brown hair and wearing cut-offs and a dark blue tube top, which riveted my attention. She was barefoot and running pell-mell and didn't appear to even see me, although she was almost on top of me. I was stunned. Okay, I am stunned. While the girl looked vaguely familiar, I was sure I'd seen her around and had noticed her. I couldn't understand why she was running at me. A moment later, I understood. Directly behind her came a man I knew, a man who had bullied me when I was a kid. His name, or at least his nickname, was Stewie. Stewie, a big, beefy guy with flaming red hair, and he had a knife in his hand, a long, sharp hunting knife. Within seconds, they had run over me. My beer went flying, splashing over the ground, although I didn't know if I had knocked it over or if they had kicked it over with their feet. And then they disappeared down the trail. It took me a few seconds to process what had happened, but then I was on my feet and running after them. Up ahead, the path veered downwards towards the meandering creek below, but when I reached the crest and was able to see the water and the entire valley, they were gone. Vanished. How could they have vanished? They literally weren't there. I stood there stunned. Yeah, I know. We already covered that. And I scanned the valley floor where two furiously running people would have been plainly visible. And nothing. Nothing. Did I just have a hallucination or something? Maybe I should quit drinking. Maybe. But instead, I went back and finished off the rest of the six-pack and got drunk. My expansive, meditative mood was as gone as the running phantoms. I drained my last brewski and went home, and quickly forgot all about it. It was several weeks later when I saw the young woman again, her picture staring back at me as I surfed the news. The headline read, "After a year, no leads in the murder of Vanessa Gagnon." Not only did I recognize her photo, I realized I knew her, had known her. Slightly. She had attended a rival high school, and I'd seen her at some of the football games, and later in bars and clubs. I knew her name was Vanessa, and I thought she was kind of hot, but I had never actually spoken to her. The article stated she had been stabbed to death, and her body found in a ditch north of the city. I guess I had known that too, as I now recalled the story, but of course I'd forgotten it over time. After all, I didn't really know her. Really. But she had been stabbed to death. Stabbed. with a hunting knife? With a long, sharp blade? Had I witnessed her murder? It had all seemed so real. But it couldn't have been, not in any objective sense. Vanessa had been dead a year when I saw her on the path. And Stewie was behind her, with a knife in his hand. Stewie and knives. Stewie was about 5 years older than me. He had terrorized me growing up, pushing me around and trying to steal my spending money. And sometimes threatening to cut me with a small knife he said was a switchblade, but which was probably just a pocket knife. I gave him a wide berth and would run away at the very sight of him. But by the time I was in high school, he had faded from my life. I found I had other things, other people, to worry about. I still saw Stewie around sometimes. He hung out at a bar I used to frequent. I think he worked for the post office, and he looked like he was probably still a bit of a prick. Had he murdered Vanessa? It seemed to fit with what I knew of his character. But what proof did I have? That I didn't like the guy? That he was a bully? That I had had a vision of him chasing Vanessa with a knife? If I told the cops that, they would think I had done it. I would have to let it lay. But Vanessa had other ideas. At first, I saw her in my dreams. Some of them pretty erotic, too. It happened for several nights in a row, and it left me feeling kind of sick, having horny dreams about a murdered girl. But then I began to wonder if these nightly visions were Vanessa's way of trying to contact me, trying to tell me something. But then I began to see her in daylight, when I was wide awake. I always saw her at the very edge of my vision, although she seemed to draw a bit closer with each sighting, and she was always scantily dressed in cut-offs and top, as well as barefoot, even at night, even in the rain. One night, she stood below my apartment, staring up at the bedroom window with what? Entreaty? I stared back, weighed down by a sense of oppression. What is it you want, Vanessa? What do you want me to do? What can I do? And that's when the idea hit me. I found Stewie in Canada 411, then typed the following note on my PC. I know what you did. VG. I put the note in a cheap envelope and sent it, wearing gloves so my fingerprints would not smudge the paper. Then, at an anonymous terminal and on a guest pass at the public library, I posted the same message on his Facebook page and on his Twitter account. I even found a payphone. Yeah, they still exist. And when he picked up, I whispered, I know what you did. Who the fuck is this? Stewie growled. I know what you did. And then I hung up and repeated the process every few days and awaited developments. If Stewie was innocent, nothing would happen. But if he was guilty, there would be some kind of reaction. Nervous reaction. I began to haunt Stewie's usual bars to see how he was taking things, and found he wasn't taking them at all well. One night, I found him, shit-faced drunk, drinking like a man possessed, like a man in mortal fear. Stewie was so drunk, they finally cut him off and strongly suggested, 2 bouncers strongly suggested, he call it a night and go home. And I was already outside, waiting in the parking lot, where I watched him get into his car and drive away. I called 911, of course. Drunk driver. I was just acting the part of the law-abiding citizen. How was I to know he would lead police on a high-speed chase and crash and burn, crash and burn, after colliding with a car and wiping out a family of 4, 2 preschoolers? I suppose I was an instrument of justice. As far as Stewie was concerned, he must have been guilty of murder, to fall apart so quickly and in that way. But 2 preschoolers? What had they done? Vanessa came to me in a dream one last time. She was naked and offered herself to me. As a reward? I turned away in shame and self-disgust, but not before I saw her eyes were 2 orbs of jetty blackness, midnight black eyes, demonic eyes. The next day, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was the one I had used when I sent the note to Stewie. The note to Stewie which had caused the whole tragedy in the first place. Scrawled on it, in rough handwriting, were the words, "Return to sender." Inside was a single sheet of paper with the following words, also in a rough hand. "We know what you did." That night, I saw them from my bedroom window. Stewie was staring up at me, standing on the exact same spot where Vanessa had stood. And now he had a real switchblade, which he kept flicking open all the time, grinning maliciously. And behind him, shuffling awkwardly across the pavement, was a family of 4. The family Stewie had killed. The family I had killed. I unlocked my door and left it open. Some night they will come for me. Let them come and exact their justice and allow me to expiate my guilt. My guilt for I know what I did. The moral of the story? Words are powerful weapons. Think about that the next time you sit down to write something to someone, whatever your intent. Alas, our poor susceptible hero. He worked himself into a real stew over Vanessa, and in stewing over Stewie. Screwy. This summer, I had a job with the city, cutting grass and clearing garbage in the local parks and on nature trails. We had to wear masks and stuff due to the pandemic, but since we work outside, social distancing wasn't a big deal. Besides, it was a good way to get lots of vitamin D. One of these parks was in the deep valley of a long, large creek, a river really. My parents told me that when they were growing up, it was a wild, semi-wilderness area, unspoiled nature in the middle of a factory town, and an excellent place to party. Now, the primeval had been pasteurized, and the valley crisscrossed with manicured trails to enable suburbanites to enjoy the outdoors in a domesticated manner. In other words, it's boring. But at least it's fresh air. This particular day, the truck dropped 3 of us off at the job: Andrea, Dave, and me. Andrea was a good-looking blonde studying business admin at Western. In truth, she was pretty hot, but she also made it very clear she considered me beneath her class. Okay, to tell the truth, I was used to that sort of treatment. Dave was a real stoner and took off to frolic with Fido, if you catch my meaning, as soon as we got to the site. This particular park had trails along a flat area adjacent to the creek, but was connected to a sharp ridge of shale. Dave told us he was going to check out the dirt trails atop the ridge for safety reasons. For smoking reasons, more likely. Lazy bum. Well, at least he was practicing social distancing. Andrea went to work pulling weeds alongside the trail while I walked along bagging garbage. Since she wasn't going to talk to me, at least I could get some exercise. It was Friday, so I was looking forward to having a few beers with some of my incel buddies later that evening. It was a coolish day, but the sun was hot and I was enjoying myself, as well as a guy could, picking up garbage. I was thinking about nothing when the screaming started. Andrea came running over to me. What's going on? Is that Dave? As if I would know. What I said was, he probably dropped his weed in the creek. Shouldn't we go look, she said. Meaning, shouldn't I go look? Okay, I said without enthusiasm. When Dave appeared, frantically scrabbling down the side of the ridge, still screaming at the top of his lungs. We watched appalled as Dave's body shook and jerked like a demonic puppet with the St. Vitus dance. He seemed to be surrounded by a moving gray cloud. Smoke? Had the silly bastard set himself on fire? And that's when we heard the buzzing. Bees, wasps, hornets, whatever. Big ones. I reached out and touched Andrea, something I'd never done before. In fact, I grabbed her arm. Come on, we've got to get out of here, I shouted. But she remained rooted on the spot. Andrea, we've got to get out of here. Now! She didn't move. I began tugging at her arm, quite hard. Under normal circumstances, she would have pulled away from me and told me to get lost. But now she was staring, transfixed, at Dave, who had fallen to his knees, his whole body covered by a moving mass of large stinging insects. And any second now, they would be coming this way. Christ, he even had hornets or whatever they were in his eyes, in his nostrils, in his mouth. I gave Andrea's arm one last tug, and then I turned and ran. I sprinted towards the creek. It was usually pretty shallow, but we weren't that far from a bend in the river, where it was about 5 feet deep, and where I could get underwater. Okay, so it wasn't a great idea, but it was the only idea I had, and I didn't have a lot of time to think about it. Andrea had been dead silent, but now she started screaming before I made it to the water's edge. I wanted to jump right in, but forced myself to wade in and slowly and carefully move over the rocks until I reached the deepest part, right in the middle of the creek, where the cold water was up to my chest. I took a quick look before going under. The bees, wasps, whatever they were swirling around Andrea, who was trying to swat them while covering her face. She was now moving, if you call running around in circles moving. But not all the insects were swirling around her. Some were headed in my direction. A lot of them. And as they approached, I got my first real look at them. They were hornets, but hornets 4 or 5 times bigger than any hornets I had ever seen. And they wanted me. I dived under. I wasn't sure how long I could hold my breath underwater, nor did I know if my sudden disappearance would confuse the hornets and make them fly somewhere else. I kinda doubted I would be so lucky. I knew I couldn't stay under long. All the pizza and donuts were catching up to me, so my idea was to splash a lot of water around when I surfaced to drive them away. I surfaced to the drone of loud buzzing, a cloud of the huge hornets swirling above me. I splashed water into the air, cupping it with my hands for maximum effect. I could tell they didn't like it, not that I had much time to look, and some of them fell atop the water, and to my horror, began to swim towards me. I submerged again. I came to the surface splashing and ducked under almost immediately, but I had time to see A, the current was taking the hornets, which were in the water, away from me, and B, Andrea, shrieking, was running hard towards the creek. I came up again and repeated the whole splashing process as I saw, out of the corner of my eye, Andrea tumble head first into the water. I was just heading under when I realized a swimming hornet had reached my hand, and it stung me. It felt like I had touched a high-voltage power line. White, searing, shocking pain. I screamed, swallowing a mouthful of dirty water, and knocked the dead hornet away, surfacing, coughing, and spitting. Luckily for me, the hornets were gone. They were now swarming and alighting on Andrea, who lay half in and half out of the water. And she wasn't moving. I ducked back under and then resurfaced, and repeated the process again and again over the next 20 minutes, until I finally realized the hornets were gone. I stood up, so my head was out of the water, and I sucked in great mouthfuls of air. And after a while, I made my way over to Andrea's body, Andrea's corpse, and dragged her out of the water, turning her over on her back. The hornets had destroyed her face. I bet she'd be ready to go out with me now. I was only able to turn her body over slowly, as I could only really work with one hand. The hand that had been stung, my right hand, had swollen up like a balloon, and burned and throbbed. I hadn't really noticed the burning pain when I was in the water. I had to get to the hospital, quick, but I couldn't find my phone, which was probably at the bottom of the creek. I reluctantly searched Andrea's pockets, but I couldn't find hers. Had she had it in her hand when we were attacked? I couldn't remember. I searched half-heartedly, but the insistent pain forced me to give up. I didn't bother to look for Dave's phone, which I was sure would have no battery. No battery. I had to get to the road, see if I could flag down a car. And at the road, I found a car. It was stopped dead in the middle of the road. Doors open. The body of a middle-aged man, or what used to be a middle-aged man, was hanging, half in, half out of the car, the interior of which was full of dead hornets, hundreds of them. The man's phone was lying on the seat, so I grabbed it and punched in 911. The line was busy. The line was busy. It's fucking 911. How can the line be busy? I tried a few more times before giving up and tossing the man's phone back onto the seat in disgust. Somebody would come along. Some other car. So I leaned against the car. A Ford something, naturally. And waited. Waited. But after 5 minutes, it became obvious nothing was going to come. And this was a busy street, too. It was the Hornets. Must have been. I was going to have to walk to the hospital. There was no other choice. My hand had swollen to twice its normal size, was beginning to turn purple, and I was starting to feel feverish. Geez, I hope I wasn't coming down with COVID-19. The hospital was about a mile away. I staggered up Cornwall, and there were bodies all along the way. Some were in cars, many in the middle of the road, while others lay sprawled across the sidewalk, purple, black, and swollen. The Hornets had been responsible in every case. It was a nightmare stroll. I didn't encounter anything alive all the way to the hospital, and I began to wonder if I was the only human being alive in the entire world. After half an hour, I staggered into emergency, in a delirium. The place was in shambles, with broken glass, overturned chairs and carts, and corpses, several human, and thousands of hornets. Nothing alive. "Hello!" I yelled. "Hello!" Only to hear my voice echo down the empty corridors. "Is there anyone there?" There wasn't. And that's when I heard the buzzing of the approaching swarm, getting louder as it got closer, closer and louder, closer and louder, closer and louder, closer. And I began to run.